Little brief talk while you're getting yourselves organised, but I've just come in today to talk to you a little bit about where I've migrated to and the risks and challenges and opportunities that I had. But I also wanted to start very quickly by talking about my family before I talk about me. My father, he migrated to Australia from India in about 1967. And I've got a picture. I was trying to bring some things to show you which would make the talk interesting, but having migrated to Vietnam, I don't have a lot of things. Anyway, this is a photograph that I can hand around, and it's a picture of my grandmother and my grandfather, my father's mum and dad. And they lived in India all their lives until they were in their 50s when they came to Australia. And they were Anglo-Indian. Does anyone know what that is? In India, India was ruled by the British for a very long time. And so there were a lot of English men especially that married Indian ladies, and their children were called Anglo-Indian. Anglo being English and Indian being Indian, so they were mixed. They were mixed English and Indian. And my grandmother's family were in India for about 400 years, and they were French and Portuguese and Indian, all mixed up together, because there were a lot of Portuguese sailors and things like that came across. And there's another picture of my dad's family, and that's my dad there in India, so you can have a look at that. But he was born in Allahabad. Anyway, the reason they came to Australia, and he came to Australia when he was 17, was for the opportunities that he got to have. Because in India, the English left in about 1947, I think it was. Is that correct?
Give or take, yeah.
And, sorry, they got independence. The English left, I think, way before that. But India got independence. And then it became difficult for Anglo-Indians to get jobs, to get good jobs. So a lot of the jobs were going to Indians. So Anglo-Indians, which was my dad's family, were finding it more and more difficult to get work. So they had not many opportunities in India. There were more opportunities for them to come to Australia. And the risk was they didn't know many people here. My dad's family came, and my grandfather had 2 brothers in Adelaide, and that was all. So they were taking a risk to come to a country they didn't know anything about. They ate different food, they spoke English, and they lived in a way that was very British, very English. But they ate Indian food. So, you know, all of those sorts of things would have been difficult for them. They didn't know anything about Australian culture, but they were the challenges, but they mainly came for the opportunities. Hands up if your mum or dad migrated somewhere for the opportunity. Okay, so you know that's a really common story. Alright, so that's just a quick little story about why my dad migrated to Australia, and he's been in Australia now for nearly 40 years, and he's an Australian citizen. Alright, so me, when I was 19...
Whereabouts in Australia were you?
Sorry, I was born in Adelaide. In Australia, in South Australia.
At the bottom.
Yep, there it is, Adelaide, that's where I was born. And I grew up there, and I went to school there. And then when I was 19, I got the opportunity to go and live in Tokyo, in Japan. Now, I got that opportunity because my auntie was working for Foreign Affairs in Tokyo, and she had a very big apartment, and I had just finished my teaching degree, and she said, why don't you come to Tokyo and live with me, and you can work, and I could earn lots of money in Tokyo. So the opportunity was I got to travel overseas. I didn't have to pay any accommodation because I could live with my family, my auntie, and I got to make a lot of money because at that time in Tokyo when I went, you could earn a lot of money for teaching English. I had 1 English class, and remember, I turned 20 when I was there, so I'm only 20 years old. It's the first job I've had outside of university. And I had about 3 jobs, and one of them was to teach people in a company how to speak English. And I taught them for 1 hour, and I got $200 for 1 hour. So it was a lot of money for me, and I didn't have to pay any rent, so it was a big opportunity, and I got to save a lot of money. The risk was I didn't know anything about Japan. I was a very naive 19, 20-year-old. I had never been overseas before. I couldn't speak the language. So my auntie said to me the first day I arrived, she said, I want you to go to the shop. It was actually, I arrived in the night time, and she walked me from her apartment to the supermarket. And she showed me how to get there, and it was so weird because the smells were different, the sounds were different, everything was strange. And she said, here's the international supermarket, a bit like the supermarket we have around here at Food. She said, I want you to go tomorrow and buy the newspaper. That's what you have to do. And I was like, then I thought, what if I get lost? What if I get lost from her apartment to the supermarket? I don't know how to ask anyone where to go. I don't even know where I live because I only came last night. So I was really scared to do it. Anyway, I did it, and I went there and I found the newspaper, and she'd given me some Japanese money, and I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know how much, like 100 yen. I was using Australian dollars, so I didn't know how many Australian dollars 100 yen was. So I bought the newspaper, and the lady said to me, how do you say, arigato gozaimasu? So I gave her the money, and she said, arigato gozaimasu, and I'm thinking she's asking me for more money. So I was looking around. I didn't realise she was saying thank you to me, because I gave her the money and she said thank you. So I was very nervous. Anyway, I made it back to the apartment, and I sat down and I was like, oh, phew, I made it. So that's one idea of the little risks. There were lots of little things, and I really missed my friends. I was very sad there for the first 3 months. I cried a lot, and I called my friends all the time. And 1 month I had to pay $1,000 for my phone bill, because all I did when I wasn't working was ring my friends in the middle of the day, which cost a lot of money. And I had a boyfriend, and I missed him. And then after 3 months, I was really happy there. And then at the end of my 12 months there, I stayed for 1 year in Tokyo. I didn't want to go home. I actually wanted to come back, and my plan was, because my visa had run out, my plan was to go back to Australia and then to go back. But I went back to Australia, and I never came back because I met another boy. And I thought he was very lovely, so I stayed back in Adelaide and didn't go back to Tokyo.
How much money did you actually earn when you left?
I saved $15,000 Australian dollars.
Wow.
Which was a lot for me because I like to spend money. And it was very expensive in Tokyo.
Did you spend a lot? Did you eventually get into happy with your life in Tokyo and got out and explored and
a lot. I loved
learning
it.
about the Japanese culture?
I loved it. Yeah.
One of the things we're going to focus on a bit is we realise why people are moving as opportunity, but then wondering what sort of difficulties or adventures or experiences you might have when you get to the new place. You explained briefly that your father and his family weren't really aware of Australian culture, and just wondering about some of the difficulties or successes you had when you were in somewhere like Japan.
Well, the difficulty was I was really, like I said, I was unhappy and missing my friends and family for the first 3 months. But when I made friends, once I'd made friends in Tokyo, because I had 2 jobs, so I had 2 lots of different friends that I had met, and I started to go out with them, and I started to go on little holidays. I started to learn Japanese. I went and studied Japanese, and so by the end of my 12 months there, I could have a good conversation with a Japanese person. So that made my time there much more enjoyable. I started to learn about the culture. I really liked the people. I started to like the food more, the more I tried it. So at the end of my year, I was really loving my time, and I really did want to come back. That was my plan. After Tokyo, when I came back to Adelaide, I then migrated to Melbourne. Melbourne's another big city in Australia. And I migrated there because I went back to study, and I went back to study art. And Melbourne had the best art schools, some of the best art schools in Australia. Also, my brother was living there, so again, the opportunity was I could move to Melbourne and stay with my brother, so it wouldn't cost me very much money. I had some family there, another uncle and another auntie, so I had people there when I first went there. I also had a good friend there from school who had moved about 10 years before that, so she was living in Melbourne. So unlike Japan, when I moved to Melbourne, I knew about Australian culture. Melbourne culture wasn't that different to Adelaide, it was just bigger. And I really enjoyed it. I loved being at university. I loved talking to art with people. I didn't have the problem of not knowing the language. I loved it straight away. Okay, there was a few risks and challenges. Money. I had gone from working full-time as a teacher and earning a lot of money to being a student, and I didn't have much money, which I had to get used to, not being able to spend as much as I was used to spending. And then from Melbourne, I migrated just for a short time, for about 3 or 4 months, to Seoul in Korea. I got a scholarship at my university to go and study painting in Seoul. And again, I was really excited about that because I hadn't lived overseas for 10 years. So the first time I'd gone was when I was 20, and when I got the scholarship I was 31. So that was 11 years. And I went to Seoul, and the opportunity was I was going to get to study art at a Korean university. So I would get to see how the Koreans learnt painting. I got to learn traditional Korean painting, I got to learn Korean calligraphy, I got to learn about the Korean culture. All of those were opportunities for my painting career. The risks, again, were I didn't know the language, I didn't know very much about Korean culture, and also I was living with Korean family, so I wasn't on my own. That was a bit of a challenge for me. I was used to living by myself or with a friend, and now I had to live with a Korean family who didn't speak any English. So that was a bit hard. We used lots of sign language and lots of smiling and lots of bowing. And there was a little Chihuahua dog that used to attack me every morning when I went to the bathroom. So I used to have to try and sneak out my door before the dog came and got me.
Did it actually get you?
Yeah, he just bit my ankles a few times. But that was a challenge. But again, even in the short time I was there in Korea, I grew to really love the food. I didn't learn very much Korean, but I learned enough that I could buy things on the street. I could ask for things, I could greet somebody. And I would have liked to have stayed there longer. Again, in Korea, the university said I could stay for another semester, which meant I would have stayed the whole year. And my university agreed to that, but I had to come home because I had trouble with the house that I was renting. So that was really disappointing because just like Japan, I would have liked to have stayed there longer. So once I was there, I've loved it and I want to keep staying there. And then I moved back to Melbourne, and my final migration was when I came to Vietnam. And that was very different than all the other trips because this time I was coming as a mother with 2 small children. And that made it much scarier because I didn't just have to worry about myself, I had to worry about my children. I had to worry, were they going to be happy here? Were they going to have enough toys? Were they going to miss their grandparents? So that was a lot more organising. There were a lot more challenges for me moving to Vietnam because it wasn't just me I had to worry about. Hands up if when you moved to another place your mum or dad were asking you things and maybe you sensed they were a bit worried about how you felt about the move. Yeah? Phyllis, did your mum and dad talk to you about coming here?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they would want to make sure that you feel comfortable. And I had little girls, so they were only 2. It was hard to have a proper conversation with them. So at least when you're 10 and 11 you can talk about it. But yeah, so the opportunities were that my husband and I could come here and we could have a better lifestyle here than we could in Melbourne, because we had a nice big house. The school gave us money to get a house, and in Vietnam we could get a nice house rather than a bigger house rather than a small house that we had in Australia. The other opportunity was that we got to work at a very good international school, and that was good for our careers. Thirdly, our children got to go to school here as well, and they got to learn part of the culture. We get to travel because we live in Vietnam. We can travel a lot on the holidays, and it's cheap. We get to learn more about the Vietnamese culture. So there were lots of positives for us coming here. The risks were, what if the children don't like it? What if we don't like it? We sign a contract as teachers with AIS for 2 years, which means we have to stay and teach for 2 years. So that's a risk, because I signed that contract before I came here. So what if I signed the contract and I didn't like the school? What if I didn't like the country? So that's a big risk for me to take. But luckily we really love the school and we love the country. So it's worked out really well. We took the risk and it was good.
Now you've liked it so much that when Miss Finnimore arrived, she signed to say she'd worked at the school for 2 years. Now, I guess it's safe to say you've enjoyed it, because this is now you've signed to stay for longer, because this is your third year, isn't it? So that means that you'd probably guess that Miss Finnimore and her family are happy here, and it's been a successful move for them, because she stayed longer than they first planned to.
Does anyone have any questions about those, especially about those words, risks, challenges and opportunities?
So with Miss Finnimore moving, she's moved. What would you say the main reason she's moved for? Risk, challenge or opportunities?
Opportunities.
Yeah. She's had the opportunity to live in different countries, to study in different countries and to work in different countries.
So that's very right, Mr. Eldred. All of my moves have been purely for opportunity. However, that first migration I told you about with my father's family, what was the main reason that they were moving, that they migrated? So my father migrating from India to Australia, what was the main reason? Challenge or opportunity? Claire? Opportunities, because what was happening in India? You remember what I told you? If he had stayed. He was only 18 when he went to Australia, so he's a young man about to start his studying at his university.
He couldn't get a job in India.
Okay. He wouldn't have been able to get a very good job in India as an Anglo-Indian, and he had more opportunities for having a good career in Australia.
That might be a good example of a challenge, not a risk, not when he was in danger, but maybe it was a challenge, something was going to be difficult.
Things had changed for that community in that country, because when he was a boy, the Anglo-Indian community had a lot of opportunities, the same as the English. And when the British left and India got independence, all of that changed, and the Indian people looked down upon the Anglo-Indian community and really wanted to put Indians in all the good jobs. So that made it difficult and challenging for the Anglo-Indians. So no questions?
Any questions at all?
Claire?
So you were part Indian, but you didn't like to go to India?
I'm part Indian, yeah, and yes, I went to India when I was 30 for a holiday, but I haven't been with my dad. My dad hasn't really wanted to go back. He considers himself Australian now, and he's not really very interested in going back to India.
Where in Melbourne did you stay?
Did I live?
Yeah.
I lived in North Fitzroy and in Hawthorn.
I was born in Melbourne.
You were born in Hawthorn? Oh, see, we would have hung out in the same places, Renee. Jonathan?
So your father calls himself Australian, so he must have the Australian passport?
Yes. He has an Australian passport and an Indian.
All right. No other questions, guys?
No.
No?
Okay, thank you for.
Yes, well, thank you for coming to speak to us.
All right.
I found that very interesting. I knew you'd been to different places.